What happens when a poor, homeless orphan saves a pregnant woman's life without knowing she's actually a millionaire? Can a single act of kindness rewrite destiny? Sit back and let the story unfold. A tale of survival, unexpected turns, and how one selfless moment can change everything. In the bustling heart of Abuja, amidst the noise and chaos, an 11-year-old girl named Helen wandered the streets, hungry, tired, and invisible to the world. She had no home to return to, no parents to hold her, only the cold pavement beneath her feet, and a quiet hope buried deep inside. Every morning, she woke up in an unfinished building, a place she had grown used to. The floor was hard, and the night air was cold, but it was all she had. Helen's clothes were torn and dirty. Her shoes, once new, were long gone, leaving her feet bare against the rough roads. She didn't have the luxury of warmth or rest. Her small body ached from walking all day, but there was no choice. Helen had to survive. The streets were both her prison and her only refuge. She would spend hours walking through the city, searching for food or anything she could use to make a few coins. Sometimes, she found old metal scraps or bits of broken glass, anything that could be sold to a recycling company. But it wasn't easy. People often ignored her, or worse, shouted at her to go away. "Filthy beggar, get out of here," they would say, turning their backs without a second thought. Despite the coldness around her, Helen never gave up. She pushed through the hunger, the loneliness, and the pain. There was always a flicker of hope deep inside her, a belief that maybe today would be better than yesterday. "Maybe today I'll find something," she whispered to herself, taking slow, careful steps down the street. Helen didn't know it yet, but in a short time, something would happen that would change her life forever. Helen's only hope was a tattered sack she carried with her everywhere. The sack was her only companion in this cold world. It was small and worn, but it was useful. She filled it with scraps of metal, plastic bottles, and other bits of junk she found on the streets. Anything that might be worth something to the recycling companies. Sometimes, she found just enough to sell for a few coins, but other times, it took days to collect enough. Even as her stomach protested, Helen kept walking. She knew she had to gather enough scraps to sell. It was another cold morning in that remote part of the city. Helen woke up on the hard, cold floor of the same unfinished building. This was her usual sleeping spot, though it offered little comfort. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her of the emptiness inside. She hadn't eaten in over a day. The hunger was becoming too much to bear, but Helen had learned to push through the pain. She always did. The only thing that mattered was surviving. Helen slowly pulled herself up from the cold floor. She rubbed her arms and legs, trying to shake off the stiffness. She walked to a nearby tap, scooping up a handful of water to wash her face. She grabbed her sack, her only companion, and made her way out into the streets. As she walked into a busy market, her sack was now heavy with the few scraps she had found. The heat of the sun made her sweat, and her stomach kept making loud sounds. She was so hungry. All around her, women shouted, calling out for customers as they struggled to sell their fresh fruits, vegetables, and cooked food. The smell of grilled meat and fried fish filled the air, making Helen's stomach ache even more. But she kept walking, her feet dragging now. She was tired. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the hunger was beginning to feel like a weight she couldn't carry. But as she turned a corner, her eyes caught something, a small, local restaurant made of wooden planks and old metal sheets. It wasn't much, but it was busy. The people inside laughed and ate, enjoying their meals, while Helen watched from the outside. Behind the restaurant, she saw a stack of used plates, some with leftover food on them. The smell of the food, though cold, still made her mouth water. "Maybe I could find something to eat there," she thought, her heart beating faster. She crawled quietly, staying low to the ground as if she didn't want to be seen. There, sitting on the table, was a plate with some leftover rice and stew. As she moved closer, the cleaner, who worked behind the restaurant, appeared, washing plates. He started scrubbing away the leftover food, completely unaware of Helen standing by. Helen knelt down next to the cleaner, her hands trembling. "Please, May I have the leftover food in that plate? She asked, her voice full of desperation. I haven't eaten since yesterday. The cleaner didn't even look at her. Without warning, she splashed dirty water from the bucket she was holding at Helen. Go away, she shouted, her voice harsh. Don't bother me. Go find your food somewhere else. Helen stumbled back, shocked and hurt. She felt the cold, dirty water splash against her face. I just wanted a little food, she thought, feeling humiliated. Why is everyone so cruel? But she was already used to this kind of treatment. She didn't cry. She couldn't. There was no time for that. As the cleaner turned away, Helen wiped her face with the sleeve of her dirty shirt and stood up, feeling small and invisible. I'll keep going. I have no choice, she whispered to herself. Her stomach was still empty, but help was closer than she could imagine. She sat beside a nearby stall, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. God, please, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Please, help me find enough scrap today, just enough to buy food. My strength is failing me. Her voice cracked with the weight of her plea. She had been alone for so long, struggling in silence. There was no one to turn to, no one to ask for help. I can't keep doing this, she thought. I'm so tired. What's the point? But then something inside her stirred. She couldn't give up. Not yet. She had to keep going. Slowly she stood up, wiping the dust from her worn clothes, and began walking again with her sack. As she turned onto another street, she spotted a small dump behind a bakery. This was a place where the bakery threw away bread and other snacks that were no longer good enough to be sold to their customers. Though it wasn't safe, to Helen, it was a glimmer of hope. She had passed this place many times before. She didn't used to pay attention to the spoiled bread that was usually dumped there. But today, her hunger was too much to ignore. Today, she couldn't walk past it. Her heart raced. As she approached the pile of bread, Helen picked up a loaf. It wasn't perfect. There was a small patch of green mold on the outer layer, but the inside still looked soft and fresh. It looked edible, and to Helen, it was more than good enough. Without hesitation, she pulled off the moldy outer layer, her fingers quick but careful. She sat down under a nearby tree, resting her sack beside her. As she took the bread in her hands, she could feel her fingers shake. It was the first meal she had in more than a day, and it felt like a blessing. Helen took a bite, but just as she was about to take another bite of the bread, a strange noise made her freeze. It was a dull sound, like something heavy had fallen. Helen quickly looked up, her heart racing. There, behind the dump where she had found the bread, a woman was lying on the ground. Helen's eyes widened. The woman's clothes were dusty, her face drenched in sweat, and she was clutching her swollen stomach with both hands. She looked weak, like she could hardly move. Helen's heart skipped. The woman was heavily pregnant, and it seemed like she had walked a long distance. She looked completely drained, as if the strength to take another step had left her. Helen stood up immediately, the bread forgotten, and rushed toward the woman. She had never seen anyone in such a state, and her instinct told her that something was wrong. What happened to her? Helen thought, panic rising in her chest. Is she all right? Without thinking, Helen knelt beside the woman, her hands trembling as she tried to lift her head. Madam, are you okay? She asked, her voice soft but urgent. The woman didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her body shaking uncontrollably. It was clear that the woman had no strength left. Helen's heart pounded in her chest. She needed help. She couldn't leave this woman like this. What can I do? She thought desperately, her mind racing. She looked around, hoping for some sign of assistance, but the streets were empty. Then her eyes landed on the bakery, the same one that had discarded the bread she ate. The bakery, Helen thought, maybe they have water. Maybe I can help her. Helen knew she had to act quickly. She looked down at her torn and dirty clothes and felt a pang of doubt. If I go in there and ask for water, they may think I'm crazy. She whispered to herself. They might chase me away like always. But I can't leave this woman like this. I can't just leave her here. She didn't have time to second-guess herself. With a deep breath, she stood up, her determination stronger than her fear. She ran to the bakery, her legs moving quickly as she approached the worker. The bakery was busy, but no one noticed her at first. She scanned the place, her eyes searching for anything that could help. Then she saw it, a small bowl sitting on a shelf. Helen rushed to the bowl, her hands shaking. She grabbed it, then hurried to the large blue water drum in the corner of the bakery. She scooped the water quickly, her heart beating in her chest. The workers at the bakery finally noticed her, but before they could react, Helen was already on her way out, running toward the exit.
"What is that girl doing?"
One of the workers muttered. But it didn't matter. Helen didn't stop to listen. She ran back to the woman behind the dump, the water sloshing in the bowl. When she reached the woman, Helen gently forced the woman's mouth open and poured the water inside, gently. The woman drank it slowly, her body trembling as the cool liquid touched her dry tongue. Helen didn't stop there. She took the rest of the water and began sprinkling it gently on the woman's forehead, hoping to cool her down, to bring some life back into her. Helen's hands were trembling as she continued to pour the cool water on the woman's forehead. The heat of the sun had drained the woman, and Helen hoped the water would help her. After a few moments, the woman's eyes fluttered open. She looked around, confused, her body weak, barely able to move. Helen stayed close, her heart still racing. She didn't know if the water would be enough, but she had done everything she could. The woman's gaze slowly turned to Helen, and for the first time, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her voice weak and shaky. "I didn't think anyone would care." Helen didn't say anything at first. She just kept pouring the water gently over the woman's forehead and chest, hoping to cool her down. She had been through so much in her young life, and yet here she was, helping a stranger in need. "I don't care if I have nothing," Helen thought. "This woman needs me." The woman slowly began to sit up, her body trembling but slowly gaining some strength. Helen helped her, holding her steady as she wiped the woman's forehead with the edge of her shirt. The sun was still beating down, but for a moment, the air between them felt peaceful. After a few minutes, the woman spoke again, this time more clearly. "My name is Bianca." Helen smiled softly. "I'm Helen." Bianca gave her a weak smile in return. "You have a good heart, Helen. You saved my life." "I didn't think anyone still cared for strangers." Her voice was full of gratitude, and Helen's heart swelled with a quiet pride. She hadn't done it for recognition, but it felt good to hear Bianca's words. It reminded her that kindness, no matter how small, still had power. Bianca's hand trembled as she reached into her bag, pulling out a slightly bent business card. There was some money in her hand, too, which she placed in Helen's hand. "Take this," Bianca said softly, her voice tired. "It's my business card. My phone number is on it. Please call me later. I'm too weak to ask you about yourself right now, but please reach out to me later." Helen took the card from Bianca, not really understanding what was written on it. She couldn't read the words, but she did see the money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a chance to buy a real meal, something that she hadn't had in far too long. Helen's heart leaped when she saw the money, and for a moment, all her worries seemed to fade. "Maybe today will be different," she thought to herself. She helped Bianca to her feet, steadying her as Bianca slowly stood, leaning on her for support. "Thank you, Helen," Bianca said quietly, her voice full of emotion. "You saved me today. I'll never forget this." Bianca slowly started walking down the street, moving carefully, but she was disappearing from Helen's sight. "Thank you," Helen whispered after her. Even though Bianca couldn't hear her anymore, Helen stood there for a moment, the business card and the money in her hand. She hadn't expected any of this. She had just helped a stranger, and now she had something to show for it, a chance to eat, a small act of kindness that had made a real difference. "Maybe this is a turning point," she thought, looking down at the business card. Feeling hope for the first time in a long while, Helen's feet ached as she walked back into the busy streets of the city. The small business card from Bianca, the woman she had helped, was tucked safely inside her sack, a reminder of that one moment when she made a difference. It's been 10 months since the day Helen helped Bianca. Life on the streets had not changed much for Helen. She hadn't contacted Bianca. Why would she care about me? Helen thought. I helped her once, but that doesn't mean I should bother her with my problem. The thoughts filled her mind often, especially when the loneliness seemed unbearable. She didn't want to be a burden to someone who likely had her own life to live, her own struggles to deal with. As the days turned into weeks, and then months, life remained the same. Helen still walked the streets, collecting scrap metal and bottles to sell. The money was never enough for more than a meal or two, but it kept her alive. Every night, she still slept on the cold floor of the unfinished building, wrapped in the same old clothes. The roof above her was nothing more than the stars, and the floor was just as hard as it had been when she first came to the city. But the business card, the small piece of paper, remained a reminder of kindness in a world that often felt harsh. Maybe one day things will change, Helen thought, holding the card in her hand sometimes, wondering if she would ever call. But for now, it stayed in a corner of the building where she slept, hidden away and untouched. I have to keep going on my own, she whispered to herself. Walking down the same street, Helen stepped onto the busy street, her eyes scanning the chaotic traffic, the cars rushing by in both directions. She took a deep breath and started walking, trying to time her step. Just as she neared the middle of the street, a loud screech of tires pierced the air. She turned her head, but it was too late. A speeding car was coming straight at her. The driver slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car collided with her forcefully, sending her flying through the air, her body twisting before crashing onto the hot pavement. The sound of the impact echoed through the street as Helen hit the ground, her chest barely moving, each shallow breath struggling to rise. As soon as the driver realized the magnitude of what had happened, he panicked and quickly swerved and zoomed off, leaving the scene without even looking back. The crowd around the market gasped in shock, and immediately people rushed to her side. Someone call an ambulance, a man shouted. Others quickly gathered around her, trying to help. One woman took off her scarf and placed it under Helen's head, while another person tried to keep the traffic back. Within moments, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed out and carefully lifted Helen onto a stretcher, stabilizing her as best as they could. Her clothes were torn, and she was covered in bruises, but they didn't waste a second. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the sirens screamed as the vehicle sped through the streets, heading straight to the hospital. Helen's body was battered and bruised, but she was still alive, though unconscious. The medical team worked quickly, but no one knew if she would make it. Will she be okay? One of the paramedics asked, looking at his partner. The answer was uncertain. Helen's life now rested in the hands of the doctors and nurses at the hospital. Would she survive the crash, or would this be the end of her fight for survival? The room in the hospital was quiet, with the steady beeping of the machines filling the silence. Helen lay unconscious in the bed, her body bruised and battered from the accident. Her face was pale, her body still, but there was a faint pulse, a sign that she was holding on. The door to the room creaked open, and a woman stepped inside. She was tall, with an air of authority, dressed in a clean white coat. But when she saw the patient lying in the bed, her heart skipped a beat. It was Bianca. Her eyes widened in shock, and she froze for a moment, staring at the young girl who had saved her life just about 10 months ago. It's her, Bianca whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. Her chest tightened, and her breath caught in her throat. This young girl did all she could to save my life, even though she had nothing. Without wasting another second, Bianca rushed to Helen's side. She took the girl's cold hand in hers, feeling the pulse, steady but weak. I can't let anything happen to her, she whispered fiercely. She must survive this. Bianca's heart ached as she looked at the bruises and cuts on Helen's face. She gently wiped the sweat from the girl's forehead with a cloth, her eyes never leaving her. You saved me that day, Helen. Now it's my turn to save you, she said quietly. From that moment, Bianca stayed by Helen's side every single day. She tended to her wounds, making sure the doctors were doing everything they could. She spoke to her softly, even when Helen couldn't respond. I know you're still with me, Bianca would say, her voice filled with hope. You're a fighter. I won't let you go. Even though Bianca had a 7-month-old baby at home, she refused to leave Helen's side. Some nights, she stayed in the hospital, sleeping in a chair beside the bed. She knew her mother, who had visited, would take care of her baby, allowing her to stay with Helen. Bianca refused to go back to her own family until she was sure that Helen was safe. Her dedication never wavered. The nurses in the hospital began to notice. They couldn't understand why Bianca, the owner of the hospital, with all her resources and staff, chose to stay there overnight. Why is she doing this? One nurse whispered to another, looking at Bianca as she gently held Helen's hand. She's the boss. She could have anyone else take care of her. Why is she doing it herself? But Bianca never gave an answer. She didn't need to explain. She was doing this because of the kindness that had been shown to her. She owed Helen everything. I will never forget what she did for me, Bianca thought as she watched Helen's chest rise and fall slowly. I won't let her fight this alone. Days passed, and Bianca's devotion to Helen never wavered. The doctors noticed the change in Helen. Her breathing became steadier. The bruises on her face slowly began to heal. The doctors couldn't explain why she was improving so quickly, but Bianca knew Helen was a fighter, and she would make it through this. But what no one knew was that Bianca's decision to stay by Helen's side would soon lead to a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. The awakening, it was early in the morning, and the first light of the sun slowly began to fill the hospital room. The soft rays touched Helen's face as she lay on the bed, her body still and quiet. Bianca sat by her side, her eyes fixed on the young girl she had been caring for day after day. The room was peaceful, but Bianca couldn't shake the worry that still weighed on her heart. Helen had been unconscious for so long, and Bianca had prayed every day that she would wake up. Then, just as the sun's warmth began to fill the room, Bianca saw it. Helen's fingers moved. Bianca's heart raced. Is she waking up? She thought. She leaned closer to the bed, her breath held in anticipation. Slowly, Helen's fingers moved again. Her chest rose and fell with a faint breath, and then her eyes slowly opened. Bianca's voice was barely a whisper. Helen, she said, her heart pounding in her chest. Helen's eyes slowly focused on Bianca, confusion filling her gaze. Where am I? She asked softly, her voice weak. Bianca smiled through her tears, relief flooding over her. You're safe now, she said, her voice trembling. You're in a hospital. Helen looked around the room, her eyes moving as she tried to understand where she was. At first, she didn't recognize Bianca. The memories from the accident were still blurry, distant. But then, something in Bianca's eyes sparked a memory. A flash of a moment from long ago, the day Helen had helped her. You were the woman behind the dumpster at the back of the bakery, Helen whispered, her voice full of surprise and disbelief. Bianca nodded, a soft smile crossing her face. Yes, she said, her voice full of emotion. And you saved my life when no one else was there to help me. I never forgot you. I just didn't know how to find you. I kept hoping you'd call. Tears filled Helen's eyes as the truth hit her. The woman she had helped, the one she had been so desperate to save, was now the one saving her life. Helen's heart swelled with gratitude, the weight of everything she had been through slowly lifting. I didn't think anyone would ever care about me, Helen whispered, tears streaming down her face. Bianca gently placed a hand on Helen's shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. Rest now, she said softly. I'll take care of everything. You're not alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, Helen allowed herself to relax. She had been through so much, but now she was safe. She was no longer alone. Bianca stayed by her side, her heart full of hope. Helen was awake, and she would recover. This was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. The bond between them had been formed in the most unlikely way, and now it was stronger than ever. A new home. Days passed, and Helen's body slowly healed. Bianca made sure she had everything she needed. One morning, as Helen sat up in bed, she felt stronger. Her legs weren't as weak, and the sharp pain in her chest had faded. Bianca smiled at her, her eyes full of hope. "Helen, you're strong now. It's time for you to go home," Bianca said softly. Helen looked at her, confused. "Home?" she asked. Bianca paused for a moment before speaking again. "I noticed that no one has come to ask about you since you were brought to the hospital." Helen's heart sank. She had been thinking about it for days, but now the truth was out in the open. She nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. "I don't have anyone," she whispered. "I'm all alone." Bianca's expression softened, her heart aching for the young girl in front of her. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said gently. "I'm taking you to my home." Helen's heart raced. She had never imagined she would be going to a proper home. She had spent most of her life alone, without a family, without a place to call home, and now Bianca was offering her a chance at something she had always dreamed of, a real. Bianca smiled warmly at her. "I would also like to hear your story, Helen, but that will be better when you're rested." Bianca helped Helen get dressed and led her to the car. As they drove through the city, Helen couldn't believe her eyes. The houses were big, the streets clean and beautiful. When they finally arrived at Bianca's home, Helen couldn't hide her surprise. It was a mansion, huge, beautiful, and surrounded by lush gardens. Bianca's husband, a successful businessman, was standing at the door when they arrived. He smiled warmly at Helen. "I've heard so much about you," he said. "How you saved my wife when no one else would." Helen felt a wave of emotions wash over her. She had never expected to be treated like this. "I didn't do anything special," Helen said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Bianca's husband shook his head. "You did more than you'll ever know." Bianca's mother, who had been waiting inside, came over and gave Helen a warm hug. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said with a smile. "We're so happy you're here." Helen could hardly believe what was happening. This was a dream. She had gone from living on the streets, struggling for survival, to being welcomed into a home filled with love. She felt safe, something she had never felt before. Bianca gently placed her hand on Helen's shoulder. "Come, I'll show you to your room. You can have a shower and get some rest. We'll talk afterward. There are a few questions I'd like to ask you," Bianca said, guiding her inside. Helen followed her through the grand hallway, her heart still racing. She had so many questions of her own, but she didn't dare ask them yet. Everything was happening so fast. She had never dreamed that this day would come, that she would be inside a beautiful home with people who cared about her. Bianca opened a door to a cozy room and smiled at Helen. "This is yours now," she said softly. "Get some rest. We'll talk soon." Helen stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around. The room was warm and inviting, the bed soft, and for the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged. A new beginning. Later that evening, after a warm meal, Helen felt a strange sense of calm in the air. The day had been full of new experiences, and as the night began to fall, she found herself sitting in the living room with Bianca, her husband, and Bianca's mother. The house was quiet. They all looked at her with kind eyes, but there was an air of seriousness in the room. Bianca cleared her throat gently. "Helen," she began, her voice soft but firm, "we've been talking, and we'd like to ask you a few questions. It's important so we can better understand your situation and know how to help you." Helen nodded, feeling both nervous and relieved at the same time. She wasn't used to being asked questions that mattered. She was used to being ignored, forgotten, or turned away. But tonight was different. Bianca's husband and mother both nodded in agreement, their expressions kind but serious. Bianca continued, "We just want to understand more about where you came from, what happened in your life, and how we can best support you." Helen took a deep breath, looking down at her hands for a moment. Then she began to speak. her voice soft but steady. "I'm from a nearby village," she said quietly. "I grew up with my grandmother. She was the only family I had. My mother, she passed when she was giving birth to me. My grandmother always told me that my mother wasn't married when she had me, and she couldn't make it after I was born. After that, my grandmother took care of me." Helen paused for a moment, her eyes filling with memories. "But when I was 8 years old, she passed away. She had hypertension, and it just got worse over time. After she passed, I had no one. I had to come to the city and try to make a life for myself. I've been on my own ever since." Bianca and her husband listened carefully, their faces soft with sympathy. Bianca's mother reached out, placing a gentle hand on Helen's arm. "You've been through so much," she said quietly. Helen nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "It hasn't been easy. I've had to survive, find food, find a place to sleep. I didn't have any choice." Bianca's husband, who had been quiet up until now, leaned forward slightly. "Helen," he asked gently, "do you have any history of education? Did you go to school?" Helen's heart sank a little at the question. She had always wanted to learn, but life had never allowed her the chance. "I went to a community primary school," she replied. "I was in primary 5 when my grandmother passed. After that, I couldn't continue. I had to leave school and try to survive." Bianca's husband nodded slowly, his face thoughtful. "Thank you for sharing that with us," he said. "It helps us understand your situation better." Bianca and her husband exchanged a glance, their expressions serious. "Helen," Bianca said gently, "you've been through so much. My family and I will need some time to discuss. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing. For now, you can go to bed and get some rest. We'll speak more in due time." Helen nodded, feeling both tired and relieved. She had never imagined she would be in a place like this, sitting with people who genuinely cared. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the day on her shoulders, but also the promise of something better ahead. She nodded and headed upstairs. The room she had been given was quiet and peaceful. She lay down on the soft bed, staring up at the ceiling for a long time. She couldn't quite believe she was here in a house like this, surrounded by people who cared. Tomorrow, they might make their decision, Helen thought, her mind racing. But would it be a decision that would change my life? Helen was hopeful, but skeptical at the same time. A family's love, weeks passed, and life for Helen began to take a new shape. Bianca and her husband had made all the necessary inquiries about adopting a child legally, and they were determined to make Helen a permanent part of their family. They spoke with Helen about the possibility of adopting her, and when the idea was presented, Helen couldn't believe it. "You mean you want to adopt me?" Helen asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Bianca nodded, her eyes full of warmth and kindness. "Yes, Helen, you've become part of our family. We want to give you the life you deserve, and we want you to be with us forever." Helen's heart raced with excitement, her mind struggling to comprehend the words she was hearing. "I've never had a proper family," she said softly, "but I want this. I want to be part of your family." The decision was made. They began the adoption process, filling out paperwork, making the legal arrangements, and ensuring everything was in place. For the first time in her life, Helen felt the security of being truly loved and wanted. As the weeks passed, Helen began to settle into her new life. She felt like she belonged, something she had never experienced before. But there was still one thing on her mind, her education. She had always dreamed of going to school, and now that she had a chance at a real future, she was determined to make the most of it. One afternoon, as Bianca and her husband sat with Helen in the living room, they brought up the subject. "Helen, we know you've been through a lot," Bianca said gently, "but we also know that you're smart and determined. We want to make sure you get the best education possible. Given your age, we think it would be best for you to start in secondary school." Helen nodded eagerly. "I've always wanted to learn more. I'll do my best," she said, her voice filled with determination. Bianca and her husband smiled. "We'll arrange for a personal tutor to help you prepare for the exams. You'll have all the support you need," Bianca assured her. Helen felt a new sense of hope, something she had never felt before. I can do this, she thought to herself, feeling the weight of her past lifting as she embraced her future. The tutor arrived, and Helen began studying hard every day. She was a quick learner, soaking up information like a sponge. The lessons weren't always easy, but Helen pushed through, knowing that this was her chance to change everything. Soon the time came for Helen to sit for her exams. She was nervous, but she knew she had worked hard. The exams were difficult, but Helen passed them all. "You did it again, Helen," Bianca exclaimed when the results came in. "First, you passed the first school leaving certificate exams, and this one too. You're officially enrolled in secondary school." Helen's face lit up with joy, tears of happiness welling up in her eyes. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "I'm going to school." The years passed, and Helen thrived in her studies. She was no longer the girl struggling to survive on the streets. She was a student, part of a loving family, with a future full of hope. Helen had found her place in the world, and with the support of her new family, she knew there was nothing she couldn't achieve. The power of kindness. And so Helen's journey came full circle. From living on the streets, to finding a family that loved her, and gave her a future filled with possibilities. The power of kindness, compassion, and never giving up on someone can truly change lives. Helen's story teaches us that no matter how hard life may seem, a single act of kindness can spark a transformation, and the love of others can help us find our true potential. Moral of the story: no one is ever truly alone in this world. Sometimes the kindness you show to others will come back to you in ways you never imagined. And no matter how difficult the journey, always hold on to hope, for a new beginning is always possible. What did you think of Helen's journey? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to me. Another powerful story is just around the corner, so be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Let's keep spreading light, one story at a time. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video.